I'm happy to introduce you to Sang-im Lee Kim, an assistant professor at National Chiao Tung University in Taiwan. She received, I've known Sang-im for quite a long time, but and during that time, she received a PhD from New York University. Currently, her research focuses on many interesting things, and usually she works on empirical data with formal analysis, and then also try to apply typological patterns in these things. And also, she's quite often in her research, a lot of different methodological techniques employed, such as ultrasound imaging, and also various type of perception and psycholinguistic experiments. Her current research program explores the cognitive underpinning of the split in category mapping of the Mandarin stops conditioned by tone when Korean-speaking learners of Mandarin Chinese produce these kind of tones. And she also investigates various aspects of phonetics and phonology of sibilants. Okay, without further ado, I will give Sang-im a floor, and today Sang-im will talk about interaction between linguistic and extragrammatical factors in merger in progress, the case of sibilant merger in Taiwan Mandarin. Sang-im, please go ahead.
Yeah, let me share the screen.
Her slides will be available in the Google Drive that's been just shared in the chat.
I think you disabled.
Oh.
Can you let me?
Yes, I think yeah, you should be able to share your screen right now.
Okay, yes.
Viviwa, can you have Sang-im as a co-host? Can you put? Yeah, sorry about this. Sorry about that. Yeah, now you should be able to. Yeah.
Can you see?
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Seunghun and Shigeto, for having me today. This is the last talk of the series, right? I hope this is something fun to share. So for this project, I've been working with two of my MA students, Ella and Iris. It's been very fun along the way. And also other NCTU colleagues and students have been huge help along the way. I appreciate that. So for a common linguistic variation, one of the most well-known findings in social linguistics is that men use a higher frequency of non-standard variants, including phonological variants, as well as morphosyntactic ones. It's a consistent and reliable findings across languages. But when it comes to linguistic change, however, men lag behind and women are most often the innovators of sound change. There are only a few cases where men are in advance of women, including the classic paper by Labov about the centralization of the vowels in Martha's Vineyard. I assume a lot of you are familiar with this work, but let me highlight the main findings of this study. So Martha's Vineyard is an island in Massachusetts. According to the census at the time, it was the poorest of all in the state. Many people depended on the summer people who would come to the island to spend their summer vacation. About these, how can I proceed? Okay. Let me see. Okay, that works. Sorry. About these outsiders, vineyarders, reactions were split between a group of people who would be happy about it, but then some people would dislike them, despise them. Labov has found something interesting about the linguistic change going on among the vineyarders. So for some of the words like right and house, the ones end with voiceless accents. The first part of the diphthong may be raised, vowels and transition. But then what's interesting about this pattern is that it's found more often among the people who live in rural up island. So the fishermen who live in up island. who happen to have the greatest resistance to the outsiders and who are most independent and stubborn defenders of their own way of living. These observations were quantified. So Labov has found a correlation between vowel change and orientation towards Martha's Vineyard. So if you're positive about island, like fishermen, then you will apply the centralization more than those people who are negative about island. You don't like it, you think that the island is hopeless, I want to leave, then you wouldn't do that as much. So basically you sound like the people who live in inland, like Boston, for example. So these findings suggest that linguistic change should be understood within the social context. So for the vineyarders, they try to establish the fact that they belong to the island by using more centralized vowels in their speech. I think that this is very interesting and inspiring, but sound change led by men is scarce. So it's not well known how linguistic and extragrammatical factors would interact with each other to derive such changes in progress. So I would like to address this issue in this talk, focusing on the nature of the alveolar retroflexible merger in Taiwan Mandarin. So I'll present multiple experiments, including production, perception, and spontaneous imitation. I know that this is pretty ambitious plan given the time constraints, but I'll try to capture a bigger picture arising from different behavior tests. One thing to note, so these studies, experiments are all still very at a preliminary stage. We're still analyzing data. So if you share your thoughts and ideas about these studies, we would really appreciate it. Help, okay? So to give you some ideas about linguistic situation in Taiwan first, Taiwan Mandarin is the official and dominant language spoken on the entire island. It's for young generation, it's the first language. They're most comfortable with this language. They're most fluent at this language. Importantly, Taiwan Mandarin has a three-way sibilant-place contrast, contrasting between alveolar, retroflex, and alveolar palatals. You don't need to worry about the last one because the merging happens mostly between the first two, alveolar and retroflexes. And the other majority language spoken in Taiwan is Taiwanese Southern Min, TSM. It's a local and substratum language spoken mostly in southern Taiwan. So if you look at the map on the left, so it's plotting most commonly used home languages. So in the north, you see more Taiwanese. So basically in the east side of Taiwan is mountains. People are not many of them there. So the north part is mostly spoken, people in the north speak Taiwan Mandarin. People in the south would speak Taiwanese Southern Mid at home. If you know some cities in Taiwan, this is Taipei, the capital city, and this is Tainan. I'll mention these two cities again later on when we introduce one of the experiments. And we're here, by the way, Hsinchu, and you're welcome to visit us. In terms of linguistic hierarchy, Taiwanese Southern Min has, so previously it was pretty bad. It was banned from speaking in public places, including schools. But then later on, there has been some promotion movement. So ever since the 90s, the status of Taiwanese Southern Min has been risen. Importantly, it has only one alveolar sibilant in the inventory. Because of the lack of retroflexes in this language, it's been long believed that Taiwan Mandarin speakers would merge alveolar retroflex sibilants because they cannot produce retroflex as well. So they, many of them would do de-retroflexion. So here is a word. The standard pronunciation of this word would be
沙发 沙发
This is retroflexed. And then, but then a lot of times I hear this.
沙发 沙发 沙发
I don't know if it is clear, but the second one doesn't really have the retroflexion in there. The variation is known to be conditioned by many other social factors. So speakers of old male rural South are more likely to implement the merger. Notice that all these social factors are actually reduced to one linguistic factors, which is whether you speak TSM. If you're an old male speaker from rural South, you are more likely to speak TSM, then you're more likely to implement the merger. This feature is somewhat stigmatized, not strongly, but still indicating low education and non-standard pronunciation. So we sometimes see hypercorrection in formal settings. So some people want to show that they can produce retroflexes, so they replace correct alveolar sounds with wrong retroflexes in their speech. It's funny. It also has some consequences in processing. So when a word is primed with the retroflex forms, then the target word may be processed slowly and with more errors. So back to our projects, we first wanted to establish the variation in spelling production in read versus conversational speech. We wanted to know what they do, and then we also wanted to know what they have stored in their mental representation. So for read speech, there were 61 TM speaking college students balanced for gender and TSM fluency. Notice that all these speakers are very first language speakers of Mandarin, and then half of the speakers were good at TSM as well. We had we used disyllabic Mandarin words beginning with alveolars and retroflexes presented in Chinese characters and so on. And for the acoustic analysis, we took frication noise and then you analyze it using a multi-taper spectral analysis, and we computed the first moment spectral means. If you're not familiar with this, it's okay. You can just consider it as a COG, center of gravity. It's very similar notion. And then based on that, we computed spectral distance between the two by subtracting one from the other. So typically alveolar sounds would have higher spectral means, and the retroflexive would have lower spectral means. So if you end up having big positive values for this spectral distance, that means you're making very good contrast between the two. But then if you're ending up a value close to 0, then it means you're not making retroflexes, you're merging the two categories. Based on that, we found some speakers of a complete merger using a Bayesian t-test for null hypothesis testing. And then we also computed Pillai scores, which is often used by sociolinguists for a measure of overlap, but it was highly correlated with spectral distance. I'll use spectral distance in this talk, which is informative on its own. Here are the box plots and spectral distance. These are the results of 29 male speakers. And then, so the small boxes next to each other are representing the spectral means of alveolar and retroflexes of an individual speaker, a single speaker. And then the colors are representing Taiwanese Southern Mean in red and Mandarin in blue. And the bottom panel is showing you the spectral distance. And this line here is representing the difference of 0. So they're not making contrast between the two if you're closer to this line. And there are many of them around this line, right? Let me show you some spectral estimates of the speaker from one group. It looks like this. For this speaker, Sa and Sha are, you see the spectral estimates are sitting on top of each other, which means that this person is making just one sound for two categories. And another person from the other end shows this. So Sa and Sha are clearly distinguished from each other. All right, and then so for 29, among the 29 male speakers, we found 12 speakers who are making a complete merger verified by the Bayesian t-tests. And among these 12 people, 6 speakers were Mandarin only speakers. They don't speak Taiwanese Southern Mean while they're implementing this merger. So basically we found that Taiwan Mandarin speakers may implement the merger without direct contact with TSM, indicating that this feature, the retroflexion, is becoming independent of the ability of speaking TSM. One thing to note before we move on, we selected some of the speakers as speakers with clear contrast. For this, we used a spectral distance greater than 2000 hertz. This is somewhat arbitrary, but we think that this is pretty conservative criterion because when you make that difference, the two sounds are unambiguously clear in perception. So in the rest of the talk for the experiments, other experiments, we'll refer to 2 groups, one group with clear merger and the other group with clear contrast, okay? So these are the results of the 32 female speakers. as you can see, spectral distance is on a continuum again, but then the speakers are far away from the zero difference line. So as such, we found differences in the number of the speakers in each group. So the complete mergers were only 5 of them, and then there are many speakers with clear contrast. Almost half the speakers were making very good contrast between the two. So we found that women implement the merger to a much lesser degree, and these findings are verified in statistical testing. So for conversational speech, we followed the methodology in Baseberg and Goldrick 2009 closely. They looked at stop voicing contrasts, and they had 3 conditions. So in context condition, they used a target word like cod, and then this word was presented together with a minimer pair competitor, which is God in terms of voicing, and then there's another filler item, yell. And then in no context condition, this target word was presented without the minimer pair competitor, but only with the filler items. In no competitor condition, a target word cop was used. Notice that cop doesn't have a minimer pair competitor in terms of voicing. Gob is not a word in English, right? So that's the differences. In an experiment, participant and experimenters, they would sit on a desk facing each other using separate laptops. The participant's task was to read aloud the target word that has been highlighted on the screen, and the production is recorded throughout. And the experimenter's task is to click on the words that's being produced by the participants without knowing which one was produced by the participant, which one was highlighted. And then the idea is that if the participant is producing the target word in a context condition, then he would make a voice aspiration. He would make a long aspiration for the target words because it has to be distinguished from the corresponding voiced stops, right? So that works out. So the results show that the words in a context would have longer VOT than the words in other contexts. So we did the same thing for the symbol and place contrast. So the words in the target context condition include, so those target words were all retroflexes so like shan jiao, and then it was presented together with the minimer pair competitor, which is san jiao. In a context condition, and then in no competitor condition, we use the word like shanduo, which doesn't have a competitor, like sanduo is not a word in Mandarin. So it's the same setting, and then we introduced one variable to the experiments, which is the participants. So we had 2 groups of participants, with one group with complete merger and the other group without the merger. Here are the results. So of the results from the speakers with clear contrasts. So they would make a clear contrast between alveolar and retroflexes in red speech. And then in a conversational speech, they would continue to make it different. So alveolars would have high spectral means and retroflexes would have much lower spectral means. Also, we found the lexical effects. So among the 3 conditions, the retroflexes produced in context condition would have much lower spectral means. The differences are very small, but it was consistent across participants, so they could draw statistical significance. So the ones produced in a context condition were more retroflexed than those in other conditions. Here are the results of the speakers with the merger. So they wouldn't make differences in red speech. That's how we came up with this merger speakers, right? And then, but then interestingly, they would enhance the contrast. So they would be able to make retroflex as well with much lower spectral means. Also, they showed the lexical effects as well. So the retroflexes in context condition would have greater retroflexion in there. So we found that speakers of the merger did enhance the contrast significantly in the conversational setting, suggesting that they do have clear representations of the 2 categories. And second, when lexical disambiguation is necessary, Taiwan Mandarin speakers, including the speakers with the merger, would enhance the contrast. The similar finding has been found in a subliminal mask priming. So to conclude so far, the split merger in Taiwan Mandarin is widespread in the speech community in Taiwan. It's no longer associated with TSM. Young men are more likely to employ the retroflexion than young women, presumably due to the social stigma associated with the retroflexion. these findings are noted in sociology research about gender ideologies in Taiwan. So women are more frequently subject to the evaluation of their qi refinement. Although Taiwanese society has grown more and more modernized, the Confucian ideal of a woman, remains parts of the society's gender ideologies. However, despite habitual merging, speakers at the merger have clear representations of the two phonological categories as shown in conversational speech. Okay, so I will present two more experiments, perception and imitation. And then, so we wanted to compare the performance between the speakers at the merger and speakers at contrast. And in the perception study, we wanted to see the relationship between perception and production, and also its interaction with social factors. So in a perception study, we had about 39 Taiwan Mandarin college students balanced for gender, fluency, and mergedness. We had a talker of a young male speaker of Taiwan Mandarin with a clear alveolar retroflex distinction. We used monosyllabic words containing initial sibilants followed by the two vowels. And for the acoustic manipulation, we took frication noise from sa and sha, for example, and then we combined them together with different amplitude to create a 8-step continuum in 2 steps. Sounds like this.
Sha, 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 sha.
One more time, do you start hearing sha sound at some point?
Sha, 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 sha.
Mm-hmm. All right, so there's nothing special about making it in two steps, but we just wanted to make the sounds more ambiguous so that people can use social cues as well as the acoustic cues. It was an identification study, just choosing between alveolar and retroflexes, and it was done in a matched guise task. So we had 2 social conditions, Tainan versus Taipei. Do you still remember the cities? One in the north, one in the south. So we told the participant that this talker was from Tainan, in Tainan condition. And then we also told them that this talker loves to watch this, loves to hear this singer's song, listen to this song. So this particular singer is known for singing a song in Taiwanese Southern Min, and then it seems very famous. And then we told that the talker's favorite is this singer and this song and so on. And then they actually they watched a music video of this person before they started experiment. And then we did the same thing for Taipei condition. This person sang a song in Taiwan Mandarin. And during the experiment, we showed them a landmark building for each condition for each city. So like Taipei 101 and Taipei condition, so that they can connect the talker with the particular city better throughout. Here are the results of the perception study. So the perception, participants' perception between retroflex and alveolars are plotted against stimuli step from 1 to 8. So 1 is most alveolar-like sound, and 8 is most retroflex-like sound. So basically, you see the positive slopes in all those panels, which means that participants are responding to the acoustic properties of the stimuli. So as the stimuli becomes more like retroflexes, they chose more retroflex responses. The results on the left are the summaries of the speakers with the merger, and the one on the right are the summaries of the speakers with the contrast. And the one at the top is A-vowel, the one at the bottom is from U-vowel. The social conditions are noted in different colors. So Taipei condition is in blue and Tainan condition is in red. What's immediately available from this graph is that you basically see blue lines are on top of red lines, which means that in general, which means that Taiwan Mandarin speaker listeners perceived significantly more retroflexes in the Taipei condition than in the Tainan condition. We take this to mean that speakers in Taiwan, listeners in Taiwan have the bias that speakers from Tainan are not able to produce proper retroflexes. So when they're told that this person is from Taipei, then they're happy to give retroflex responses. Whereas when they're told that, oh, this person is from Tainan, then they're rejecting. They have this bias that, oh, this person must not be able to produce retroflexes. They wouldn't give retroflex responses as a result. So, and this is consistent with the social linguistic differentiation in Taiwan. And what's more important for us was the differences between the two groups, speakers with the merger and speakers with the contrast. So you see that the slopes in the merger, the group merger, were flatter than those in the contrast group, right? And across different bio contexts, which indicates that they're less sensitive to the acoustic cues. Which suggests that they are more relying on the social cues instead. Here are some extreme cases from that group, merged group. So there are two speakers. So one speaker who was assigned to the Tainan condition gave most like alveolar responses for most cases. And then another speaker who was assigned to the Taipei condition gave retroflex responses almost all the time. So basically what that means is that these speakers are not responding to the acoustic properties of the stimuli, rather they're just using solely on the social cues. Because this person is from Tainan, of course it's not retroflex and so on. All right, so we found that speakers of the merger differ from non-mergers in perception, and they're more sensitive to the social cues, such that they associate a particular Mandarin dialects like Taiwan Mandarin, so Tainan Mandarin, more strongly with the retroflexion than speakers with clear contrasts. This gives us some question. It was kind of, in some sense, it's kind of strange. Why would the speakers of stigmatized forms be more biased against the speakers of the last prestigious variety? Someone who does the same thing, you're more biased against those people who do the same thing like you, rather than doing perceptual compensation and such kind. So we were wondering what's the nature of that bias. Is that really a bias against stigmatized forms or something else? So we take this question to another study, spontaneous imitation. This is the last one, by the way, bear with me. So the spontaneous imitation study is a behavior task. You would listen to a model talker and you would repeat after. And then we typically find subconscious changes in production towards a model talker. There's an interesting study done by Babel et al. Focusing on merger in progress, like our case. In that study, New Zealanders are tested. Those speakers are known to merge the vowels in the near square lexical sets. But then when they're exposed to an Australian talker who make a clear distinction between the two vowels, they would unmerge. But then what's more interesting about this study is that if the model talker was described to have positive views about New Zealand, they would unmerge even more than in the condition where the talker doesn't like New Zealand. So we adopted the same methodology, and then our model talker was a model talker from Beijing. So Beijing Mandarin is known for having very clear distinction between alveolar retroflex distinctions, as you can see from these examples. Play the sound.
三角，三角。
That's an alveolar sound, and then
山角，山角。
Is it clear? So retroflexion is known to be the most salient feature dividing Taiwan Mandarin and Beijing Mandarin. So if you ask two groups of speakers, they would actually give you retroflexion. That's the main differences between the two languages. That's been verified in this study. There are two groups of participants, merged and contrast group, and then it was a spontaneous imitation study via a matched guise task. So we gave a social condition as well. So in a positive condition, we told them that this talker is from mainland China. He came to Taiwan as an exchange student, and he fell in love with Taiwan. And he feels that Taiwanese people are very enthusiastic and genuine, which is actually true. And he decided to work in Taiwan and so on. And in a negative condition, we gave a reversed narrative. So this person is an exchange student from China. He feels that Taiwan is very backward and he doesn't like culture. He doesn't like Taiwan. He wants to go back to Beijing as soon as possible and so on. Here are the results of the speakers with clear contrast, okay? There are four conditions. So baseline condition refers to, it's not from the imitation study, it was from the red speech. So their baseline speech. And then the negative positive conditions are from the imitation study, and then model talkers acoustics properties are also plotted as a reference. So basically, we find that spontaneous imitation triggered broad contrast enhancement and the direction of the model talker, as we predicted. It's neat. But then we also found that the degree of imitation varied as a function of social preferences. So if you're in a positive condition, you would follow the model talker more than when you're in the negative condition. It's consistent with the previous findings. But then when we looked at the results of the merged speakers, then, well, of course, the speakers of merger generally enhance the contrast and respond to the model talker. So you see the baseline condition, they merged completely, but then they enhance the differences and the imitation study. But then what's puzzling for us was that they were not systematically influenced by the social preferences. So even though they're in the positive condition, they imitated less than the speakers who were in the negative condition. And it was very puzzling. It was we just didn't know why that would be the case. So we looked at the post-experiment survey. This survey was carried out in order to confirm that they formed impressions about the talker as we planned, as we provided in the experiment. So we worked out for the speakers with clear contrast. So the speakers who were in the positive condition would say, oh, his accent is good. He seems kind. I would like to chat with him online, and I would take him to the campus tour more positively compared to the speakers who were in a negative condition. But then the speakers who speakers of merger did not respond to the social condition provided in experiments. So we didn't see the speakers in the positive condition formed a better impression about the talker. And that seems to be the reason why we see the lack of the acoustic enhancement towards the model talker. To summarize, the speakers of the merger differ from the non-mergers in imitation as well as in perception. So they did not form positive impression for the talker, and therefore they were resistant to imitating the model talker carrying a non-Taiwan Mandarin accent. So we think that the retroflexion beyond stigmatization, this feature may have been reinterpreted by the speakers of the merger as a symbolic feature representing Taiwanese identity, like the ones in Vineyarder. To conclude, so some of the aspects of the pattern suggest that the retroflexion may be a stable sociolinguistic variable, given that speakers of Taiwan Mandarin do have clear representations of the two phonological categories. But then men are more likely to employ the retroflexion because of the lingering gender ideologies in Taiwan. But when a bigger picture arising from the other behavior task seems to be that sibling merger is presumably not a transitional or accidental phenomenon, but it's operating systematically below the level of one's awareness, as we have seen in imitation and perception study. And then the retroflexion seems to have newly emerged as a means of expressing positive orientation towards their speech community in Taiwan. And then stigmatization of the feature is likely to diminish gradually because the status of Taiwanese Southern Min TSM is rising, which could potentially initiate long-term sound change. We don't know yet, but we need to see. That's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sang-in. Now the floor is open for question. If you have any question, please send a direct message to Seunghun Lee. I'm one of the co-hosts. You should be able to find. I think people are still thinking.
Anything would be very welcome. We are still at a very preliminary stage. We haven't written anything yet, and anything, criticism, sour criticism, all unwelcome. Help.
Oh, okay, we have a clarification question. Shigeto Kawahara from Keio.
It was really good. Given how much you had to present, it was really clear. But I think I missed it. But is the merger limited to sibilant pairs? So my question is, do these merger speakers still have a alveolar retroflex contrast in other manner of articulation?
So the retroflexes are tested only for the sibilants.
Okay.
Yeah, the sibilants I didn't mention. So the sibilants contrast also for the manners. So the fricative, affricates, and aspirate affricates. There are three sets. within for one place of articulation. So then you have like 9 of them. Like sorry, 3 retroflexes and then 3 alveolar series.
Okay, but you don't have that contrasting stops, for example.
No.
No, okay.
Need a sibilants. Yeah.
So these merger speakers can make that contrast. I forgot which context it was, but when they really had to, they can.
So in a conversation setting, when they are presented together, when the target words with the retroflex sound was presented together with the contrasting alveolar sound, then they would enhance the retroflexes. They would make the retroflex as well.
I see. So it suggests that they can, but they don't.
They can, but they don't. And then it's known to be so that a lot of Taiwan Mandarin speakers are good at stylistic shifting. So in formal setting, they would carry retroflexes much better than in the casual setting. And then, you know, in terms of the register, they would change their speech a lot, but it's subject to, you know, research question.
I see. Soon, do you have other people lining up, or can I ask one more question?
We have one other people, so maybe you can come back.
Yeah, I'll come back.
Yeah. Next is Hanim Kwon. Has a question. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for a very, very interesting talk. I have a quick clarification question. So in your spontaneous imitation study, there were 1 model speaker in 2 match guys. One is
Right.
favorable social condition and the other is negative. And I believe the imitators didn't do both conditions. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's between subject experiments, so they only did one of the conditions.
Okay, right. So then maybe there is some effect of imitators' tendency to, you know, how much to converge to the model speaker when you compare positive and negative, right?
Yeah, that's why actually we did we used the red speech as a baseline. So first examined what they do, and then we compared it with the imitation results. So so the imitation itself is between subject experiments, but we're comparing 2 different studies basically, the red speech and then also the imitation study, and how much they enhanced from that, from the baseline condition. Did I answer?
Right. So yeah, so I just wanted to make that the point that, you know, there are people who are more prone to imitate or less prone to converge, right? So if you compare like 2 different groups of speakers with 2 different conditions, when you see like more imitation going on in one condition, it might be just due to different speakers. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So we so we need to recruit you know, as many participants as we can. So, and also the thing is there are many social factors involved in this pattern.
Right.
So it's like, you know, it's divided by Taiwanese fluency, it's divided by gender, it's divided by something. So it's really hard to, but we tried our best to meet, you know, to make it balanced for all possible things. But still, I get what you mean. So like people are different in terms of how much they want to imitate after the talker, but yeah, I don't know what else I can do.
Thank you.
Except that we need to recruit more people.
Yeah.
Except that, yeah, and then we are trying, but then it's not easy because we need to first establish what they do in their red speech, and then also we need to look at the imitations.
Right.
Yeah. Well, good point. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Shigeto, do you want to follow up with your second question?
So can you show us the slides where you show the range of different merger, like a complete merger, clear contrast, that continuum? It's, yeah, that one.
Right.
It's really striking that it's a whole range of continuum rather than you have a division between, you know, clear contrast and merger. It's difficult like a common observation?
I was very surprised. I was very happy to see it though.
Yeah, this is interesting, isn't it?
Because previously people just look at, for acoustic study, people look at usually like 10 people, and then people just classify them into like, oh, mergers versus non-mergers. But then I was curious what they do. So we just, like recruit many people and then just analyze it thoroughly. But then it turns out like there's a continuum. Also, before we classify the people into the different groups, we also did the perceptual judgments whether this person is merger or not. But then we realized soon that it was impossible. It's very, you hear some of the people who in the middle, it's just hard to tell. So we coded this person sounds like merger, sounds like contrast, but then not sure. And then when we looked at the acoustics more carefully, it turns out it's on a continuum. That's why.
I guess that this raises a couple of questions. So what are these intermediate speakers doing? That's one question. And another question is, in similar cases like this, which is I guess a merger in progress, would you expect to see this kind of continuum rather than a dichotomous yes merger, no merger distinction?
To answer your second question, I don't know about the third case.
Yeah, sure.
Probably, I don't know. I mean, it said they didn't look at that many speakers in acoustically, so I don't know. Probably yes, because I see some of the studies who are using these mergedness as a continuous variable. I assume that it's probably continuous, but then it might be more like the bimodal distribution there. But in this particular case, it's absolutely continuous. And also, to answer your first question, so the ones right next to the group of people with the complete merger, then those are probably near mergers, right? So they're making very small differences consistently, so that it turns out they're not merging, completely merging. But then the differences are probably not perceptible, and perception is probably not perceivable. So there's some of the people in the middle are probably near mergers, but then some of the people closer to the other end might be making clear contrast. So the thing is, I mean, we could have used all of the participants using the ordinal variable, considering the spectral distance as an ordinal variable. That's one way to go. And then I'm still thinking about it, how to do that, how to combine all the production study and perception study to make it more clear. But for now, we just did it only because it was easier to see the differences between the people from two ends. We collected the data, by the way, perception for imitation, and we collected all of the speakers in the middle so we can look at it. But for now, we haven't, but we can consider looking at it too.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Can I ask a short question? Like, do you by chance check the familiarity to the words that they were tested by these speakers? And if so, what do you see?
Yeah, are you asking about the particular task or just in general?
Like, for example, in this particular graph, like when speakers needed to produce, the assumption is they just know it, but like how familiar were they with those words?
Very just in terms of familiarity, for sure. I mean, we just used common words, the very familiar words to them. In terms of frequency, we try to control the frequency as well, but it's not always possible because for this particular production study to establish the acoustics, basic acoustics, it's more important for us to control the phonological environments, like the vowel a and u and the tone and the syllabicity and so on. These are more important because the frication noise will be influenced by the phonological context very much. We first wanted to establish what they do, but then familiarity, of course, they know very well. But then in terms of frequency, there might be some fluctuation across the words. But then also, Yeah.
Maybe it's not directly related, but could the speakers in the middle of that spectrum be using different cues, like in the vowels, for example, to distinguish these two?
Very good question. So vowel transitions is one of the important cues to distinguish this. When you have a three-way sibilant place contrast, the vowel transitions are always mentioned, and but then actually that's important for singling out the alveopalatals. So like xia, so it has large vowel transitions from E-like sound to A, because you're putting tongue front, so you're moving from there, then it sounds like iya in there, and that's actually very important cue for perceiving alveopalatals as alveopalatals. But then the other two, which is the focus of the study, alveolar and retroflexes, the transitions are almost the same. I've looked at Mandarin, Polish, and the languages that has three-way distinctions, and the transitions are like sitting on top of each other. So although like, there's some small differences at the beginning of the vowel, but it's not a good cue for distinguishing the two non-palatal sibilants.
And these speakers also didn't show that kind of.
Yeah. When they merge, they just merge the vowels as well, and then when they contrast, well, still there's no good transitions with the two.
Okay, thank you. We will continue this discussion after wrapping up today's event. So if you please join the discussion afterwards, but first let me wrap up today's event. First, thank you one more time to Jiseung Kim and Sang-in Lee Kim for interesting talks and stimulating conversation. Then let me thank the two assistants, Migiwa and Michinori Suzuki, for helping out with this event from the beginning throughout the whole series. And I also, of course, thank the co-host Shigeto Kawahara from Keio University. This event was financially supported by the Institute of Cultural Linguistic Studies at Keio University, and no financial support, but like Zoom support was done by the Linguistic Lab at International Christian University. So this ends the first season of the Keio ICU Linguistics. In the beginning of this talk series, we didn't have something like a season, but we realized it's nice to have a season. And good news is, or exciting news is that we will have a season 2. So please mark your calendar for that. The primary speaker of the season 2 is Donka Steriade from MIT, and she will deliver her plenary talk on October 31st. It's Halloween, Japan time, but not in America. Not in America, it's October 30th, but in Japan, it's October 31st. The first meeting of the season 2 will be before the plenary talk, starting on October 2nd. And on October 2nd, on Friday, Catherine Franks and Laura from University of Delaware and Laura McPherson from University of Dartmouth will present their work. And this will be followed by Tim Rutger from University of Osnabrück and Adam Tsong, Queen Mary University of London on October 16. Then Kartik Duvarsula from Michigan State University and Samuel Tilson from Cornell on November 13. And Chikaku Takahashi from Stony Brook and Jianjing Kwang from UPenn on November 27th. These dates were all Japan Standard Time. So if you are in a different time zone, it may be one day before. This time we also have 2 presenters from Europe, which means that the dates or some of the times will be different from our usual meeting time. So if you have signed up for this series, you will receive information accordingly. More information, including titles and abstracts, can be found on the ICU-LINC website that you've been receiving in the past emails. So I thank you all who participated in today's colloquium, and also I thank the speakers and everyone else who made this colloquium possible. So we hope to see you on October 2nd. Thank you. So recording will now be stopped.